What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Grid Live Encore. I'm Ben Schneider alongside Brandon Crosslin. Brandon, how's it going tonight?
It's going well, Ben. Good to see you again, and good to have our Grid audience back with us for another Grid Live Encore.
Yeah, great to see you as well. And our Grid colleague Joshua Birch was supposed to join us tonight to discuss some of the Formula 2 stuff. Unfortunately, he is under the weather with food poisoning. Josh, if you're watching, we wish you our best. Get well soon.
Get well, man.
We have a packed show tonight. Formula 2 in Saudi Arabia, like I mentioned, ARCA West at the famed Irwindale Speedway, and NASCAR's Camping World Truck and Xfinity Series took on Circuit of the Americas in Austin, Texas. Now, before we get into the Formula 2 recap, Brandon, I want to give you an opportunity to discuss something that we've been discussing on Grid Live all weekend long. Obviously, Formula 2 joined F1 in Saudi Arabia, and the controversy that already existed over whether or not the sport should be racing in the country became even more controversial on Friday with that missile scare. So what's your take on how the weekend played out? And then what does it say about the FIA that they continued to race on this past weekend despite the threat?
Yeah, Ben, it was kind of scary. I mean, the whole start of it is just another week into Saudi Arabia, the second round of the championship for Formula 1 and Formula 2. And then all of a sudden we hear the news of Yemen Houthis, I think they're Houthis or Houthis, attacked on the Aramco refinery. I mean, and which is the title sponsor of the Grand Prix. And so very devastating news to begin with. And then to see the FIA's response and then the drivers having to speak with the FIA and all the stakeholders for hours and hours. And they finally come out of that meeting and we find out we're still going to have a Grand Prix weekend. It is kind of disheartening to know that that's the way things go. And I can't speak. I'll just speak from experience here. I'm not a seasoned Formula One follower, but I've been watching probably more intently since about 2019 or so. So fairly young blood and the politics and everything that goes on behind Formula One. I do know as much as that they go to these sorts of places because that's where their stakeholders are. We got Jeddah, we've got Bahrain last weekend, and just plenty of things out in the Middle East that they do take part in. And I mean, any part in the world, there's going to be a risk factor that you're going to have to take into account. But this was scary, just the way that it was handled. And it's not, I kind of related it in my mind when I saw the news. It's not like here in the South, in Tennessee, if we get a snow day, like for school, or if there's snow coming, we're not like, please let us off for a day. We want to get, it's not like we want to get out of school kind of thing. I think the teams and the drivers are fearing more for their safety, their lives. And not only that, but for the audience that's there. And, I don't know how you get plane tickets to Saudi Arabia. I'm still trying to figure that out because I've kind of looked at those things out of curiosity online, and it always gives you those like class whatever restrictions. Like there's no way you're going to be able to travel there anyway. So for one thing, I don't know how Europeans make their way over there for a Formula One race. That'd be interesting to find out. But yeah, it's strange that they would do this and they would continue doing it. But I'm thankful that no casualties were at the refinery, and also no casualties or no further attacks were at the weekend. And but it is very suspicious going forward. We would look at the 15-year. I think it's like a 15-year contract that they still have for Saudi Arabia. And I don't think the FIA is phased at all from this attack. I think they're going straight ahead with plans, and it probably would take something more serious for them to start to reconsider these sorts of dangerous, just relatively known dangerous areas of the world to have these sorts of events.
Yeah, well, our own Joe Samniego's chiming in here. It was interesting to see the team principals and drivers have different opinions on racing in Saudi Arabia. And, one of the things that you brought up, Brandon, was, I think somebody even went on record saying, if we had a credible threat, then we absolutely would have not hesitated to cancel the race. And I'm sitting over here like, obviously I'm not on the grounds over there. I don't pretend to know everything that they know. But if a missile strike 10 kilometers away from the circuit where you're hosting a race that is sponsored by, and a series that has a partnership with Aramco, whose building was just, I mean, if that's not a credible threat, I don't know what is.
I think
it seems off to me.
Yeah, I think the problem there is what they were probably considering was it's probably a normal event around there for things like that to happen. I mean, it was crazy. You look at all the news reports, this terrorist group from Yemen, they let them know that they were going, they probably reported to the news like, hey, we're the ones that did it. And like they're in it. And I think my wife just said, even if they didn't do it, they probably would say that they did it just so they could get the street cred on the terrorist scene, if that is a thing. But yeah,
it is tough. And, you have to compare and contrast with, how they responded to what's happening in Russia right now. And, Russian Grand Prix was axed within 24 hours. And then you turn around 2 weeks after the drivers do that no war symbol coming together to stand with Ukraine. And that's great. But what kind of message does it send to then turn around 2 weeks after that and go to a country where really pretty much the exact same things happening? It's just not getting as much coverage over here in the West as Russia and Ukraine are.
Yeah. From two guys sitting in the West, it looks like a double standard on the FIA's part. And I would think of what would happen if this was in an American facility. What if at the Indianapolis 500 one morning there was a bombing 10 miles away, or kilometers to miles, maybe 8 miles away. Yeah, close, 7 miles away from Speedway. They're going to do something. They're going to delay the start. They're going to have an investigation. They're going to delay the event by a day or so. I mean, measures would be taken for such an event like that, but maybe that's not a good comparison because there's a lot more people at the Indianapolis 500 than there would be at the Saudi Arabian GP.
Yeah. And well, like I said, I think it's important that we remember, the limited information that we have on a complete opposite end of the world, because, one thing that I'm often reminded by is, we hear people are going to Saudi Arabia and we get concerned because we know what the situation over there can be like for a lot of people. But then I think about, when people in Europe, people in Asia maybe hear about mass shootings here in the United States. Well, we're here in the United States and we know that it's a very big country with very different communities and areas. And, what's happening in Chicago or New York or Los Angeles or wherever, something like that happens doesn't really affect where I am in Delaware, where you are in Tennessee, because we're so spread out. And unfortunately, in recent years, we've become, I think, kind of numb to those kinds of things because the tragedies do seem to be more common these days. But the point is, if you see that on the news in a foreign country, you might gain an entire perspective on America based off that isn't necessarily totally accurate. So similarly, I think, maybe what happened in Saudi Arabia this weekend, like you were saying, that might be something that they're used to, but they know how to handle differently than if that were to happen 10 kilometers from the Indianapolis 500. We have another comment coming in from Joe here, flashing back to 2001. The United States Grand Prix was on the rocks because teams were unsure about their safety after 9/11. I felt that the situation in Jeddah was more of a threat than Indianapolis in 2001 after 9/11. And, to bounce off of that point, what happened in 9/11 happened in New York, Washington, D.C., and Pennsylvania. You go a little bit further out west to Indianapolis, and obviously the country as a whole is shaken by the tragic events of that day. But you think about going to the Indy 500, going to the United States Grand Prix, in a completely different part of the country. Is the risk really that great that lightning strikes twice and that's their next target? It probably isn't that great. So it is important to keep perspective in these things. But in the grand scheme of things, I think the condemnation of racing in Saudi Arabia in the first place was already pretty strong given the circumstances. And I think based on what happened this weekend, it's only going to continue to grow from there.
It's an interesting conversation to have, but the overall, I think, consensus from you and I is that we're just glad people are okay and that the whole weekend went unscathed.
Yeah, well, that was my biggest fear, and it was honestly kind of tough to focus on the racing on Saturday and Sunday because, you were worried about what could happen, what could go wrong, would it go wrong? Fortunately, nothing did, and hopefully everybody got out of there safely, and we can move on and focus on the rest of our season. But, we got to do this for the next 13 years. We're only on year 2 of a 15-year contract, and, that leaves, I think, a lot of people feeling uneasy about the sport's future in the country. But we'll have to see what happens. We came back to the same conclusion all weekend that, cash is king. So as long as the FIA's pocketbooks are filling up with the money that they're gaining from this contract, I unfortunately don't think much is going to change.
Yeah, I did want to say that, but that's kind of where it is. It's probably where the money is, and that's probably where that decision was made very quickly in some backroom boardroom. But I'm afraid that this kind of lax attitude towards the attack by the FIA might make the terrorist groups around that area be more comfortable next year with trying something different if they know they're not going to get their wrists slapped.
Yeah, it is a tough subject to talk about, but it's a necessary one when we have a sport that we love so dearly racing there and people that we care about and are concerned for their safety. So fortunately, we dodged a bullet this weekend, but it does raise a lot of questions, I think, as we look forward to the next decade plus that they're scheduled to go back there. So we'll cross that bridge next year and in years to come when we get there. For now, let's do a brief update. Unfortunately, like I mentioned, we do not have our Formula 2 expert Joshua Birch with us tonight, but we will do our best to update you all on what happened. And let's start with the sprint race. Felipe Drugovich qualified on pole for the feature, but the reverse grid standards meant that it was Dennis Hauger who lined up first on the grid for the sprint race, although Liam Lawson was the one who took victory in the end on Saturday in what was really a chaotic sprint race, followed by Yuri Vips and Felipe Drugovich. Now, you'll notice Jake Hughes is not on the top 10 here. He fell all the way back to the end of the field because he was disqualified for a technical nonconformity, despite the fact that he originally finished on the podium in P3. And adding to the controversy, Hauger got a great start, but finished all the way down in P16. He was involved in an incident following the first safety car restart. You see Maury Cordial all the way down there. He crashed out of the race on lap 1. Jack Duhan crashed into the back of Logan Sargent after the first safety car restart, as it was unclear whether or not drivers were set to resume racing. Now, the drivers were instructed to head through the pit lane, but that call was immediately reversed 22 seconds later with a message that the pit lane was closed. Hauger, however, followed the original instruction and subsequently fell down to 12th before receiving a 10-second stop-go penalty on top of that, which relegated him even further back. Now, the Prema team did appeal the race results, but their appeal was denied, with the FIA saying that the team had a sufficient amount of time, to communicate the change in instruction to their driver. Once the race restarted, Hughes took the lead from Callum Williams, but it was Lawson who made a brilliant pass for the win with just a few laps to go. Now, in the feature race, it was a bit of a strange start again. We had an aborted start and an extra formation lap, but it was Drugovich winning from pole position. Really, the victory was never in question. He was followed by Richard Verschoor and Jahan Deruvala. As you take a look at the rest of the results here, Hughes does pick up some points with a P4 finish in the feature this weekend, so it's not a complete loss for him. Drugovich, meanwhile, does lead the points by 11 markers over Lawson in second and by 13 points over Verschoor in third. Lawson's luck, as you see here, took a turn for the worse in the feature race. He retired with a loose wheel, and Formula 2's next race weekend will be April 23rd and 24th when they join F1 in Imola. So they have almost a full month to regroup, get ready, and continue on with the rest of their season. Now let's move on to something completely different, Brandon. ARCA West at Irwindale Speedway.
Yeah, nice to go back to Irwindale. And with ARCA West, Sunrise Ford Racing's Tanner Reef led every single lap to take his first career win ahead of Bill McAnally Racing teammates Cole Moore and Austin Herzog. It looked like it was going to be a battle for the win between Reef and his Sunrise Ford teammate Jake Drew, but a late crash involving Chris Loudon forced overtime, and Drew collided with his old teammate Trevor Huddleston on the restart. Drew maintains a 3-point lead over Reef as Sunrise Ford continues to chase their first championship since 2018 with super late model great Derek Thorne. Now, Ben, does Sunrise Ford look like the team to beat right now as the switch from Toyota to Chevrolet put Bill McAnally's team a bit behind where they were last year?
I think we talked about this a couple weeks ago, the first time ARCA West had their season opener at Phoenix. I do think Bill McAnally Racing is maybe a little bit behind where they were. Anytime there's a manufacturer change, I'm thinking probably one of the more recent high-profile ones is when Stewart Haas Racing went from Chevy to Ford in the Cup Series. In their 2017 season, Kevin Harvick did still get a couple of wins that year, but it was a bit of a step back before they were able to get back to the top of the field where they were before the manufacturer change. So, you do something that might throw off your engineers a little bit slightly. You maybe expect a little bit of a dip in performance, but then again, BMR has set a really high standard the last few years. No matter who's driving that 16 car, whether it's Jesse Love, Derek Kraus, Todd Gilliland before that, even Gio Scelzi, who's on a completely different career path now, not in NASCAR, but he got in that car in 2020 and won a race. So, that car, it seems like no matter who's in it, it has been a dominant force in the ARCA Menards Series West and K&N Pro Series West for the last few years. So they've set a very high standard for themselves at BMR. And, I have no doubt. It's not like they've never run Chevys before. Toyota's only been in the sport for the last decade and a half. So that team has history that goes back even before that with Chevrolet. So I have no doubt that they'll be able to get that partnership back where it belongs, up at the front of the field. And, they're really already there. I think it's just a matter of Sunrise Ford having a slight edge now instead of the slight edge that BMR has had over them the last few years. But you see Cole Moore, Austin Herzog up here, second and third. I think things go slightly differently. You're going to see them competing for wins, in the not too distant future. But let's give all credit where it's due to Tanner Reif here. Leading every lap is no small feat, no matter what series you're racing in. And Jake Drew as well. Like I said last time we were talking about this series, he's got to be fired up after barely missing out on a championship last year. So I think, Sunrise Ford are certainly in a good position to make a championship run here, which they've come up short to them the last few years. So it'd be great to see a battle between Sunrise Ford and BMR like we usually have in the West Series. And I think they certainly have positioned themselves well to start the season here. Now, in other news, the Burgess family actually nearly made history Saturday night as the first mother and daughter to compete against each other in an ARCA-sanctioned race. And I'm trying to think if that's ever happened in NASCAR either. I know Mike Wallace raced against his daughter Chrissy in Talladega in the Truck Series in 2009. That's the only thing I can think of that comes close to what the Burgess family nearly did. And I say nearly because Bridget's mother, Sarah, was initially added to the entry list as a late entry and even qualified in a car, but she withdrew just before the green flag. Now, we've been told that Sarah will be credited with 3 championship points for making an attempt. There is a little bit of a discrepancy here. You see, we have Sarah Burgess listed in 16th place on our results. That's because at the time we went to build the graphics for tonight's show, Racing Reference had her in 16th place with a did not start reason out, if you will. But I did some asking around on social media, and I actually got a response from ARCA's own Charlie Krall, who I completely trust 100% on this. He says that will not be the case. It will be listed as a withdrawal, but she does still get 3 points because she attempted a qualifying run. And we'll have more on this story on Thursday's Women in Motorsports show. Schedule pending, I may even be joining Joe and Daniel on that to discuss this subject. So we'll see. Hopefully everything works out there. But this is something that the Burgess family has been working towards for a long time. But that history-making moment is going to have to wait just a little bit longer. Maybe when the series comes back to Irwindale in July, or maybe sooner than that. We'll wait for more news on that front.
Yeah, really cool stuff. And that's going to make the Women in Motorsports a must-see if you're going to be making an appearance on there.
Yeah, well, I've got some thoughts on, a couple other things that happen this weekend as well. So hopefully, it's an early morning for me, but it's even earlier for Joe and Daniel make that work every Thursday morning. So
no excuse.
Yeah, no excuse for me. Joe's got 3 hours, even further disadvantage than I have. So, hopefully the Burgesses get that moment this year because they have been a fantastic story in ARCA West these last couple of years. And, you're hearing these stories about Sarah, really being Bridget's entire pit crew. That team does a lot with a little. And, they did just acquire a second car. I know they've been trying to do this for a while. And my guess is, I think Sarah was probably going to start in park Saturday night. I've got a feeling she maybe wants to wait to do this race with Bridget, not just to say I start in parks, but I got it done. We made history. She actually wants to race Bridget on track, which I think hopefully they'll get the opportunity to do that a little bit later on this season. Now let's move on to the Truck Series recap here. It was Zane Smith who scored a dramatic victory, his second of the season, and the second in a row actually at Circuit of the Americas for Front Row Motorsports. They got the win with Todd Gilliland last season. Now Smith has 2 wins already, a 5th place finish at Atlanta to go with them, and arguably should have had a top 3 finish at Vegas with a 2nd place finish there. Of course, he got disqualified from that race, and that bumped Kyle Busch up to 2nd. But we look at Zane Smith, you look at the fact that he's finished second in the championship each of the last 2 years. We asked it at the start of the season, and now we're starting to see the results to back it up. Is he emerging as the top championship favorite right now?
He's emerging as one of the top championship favorites. I'd say yes. The win at Daytona, we were skeptical, like you mentioned, but after seeing the first few weeks of the season, it's starting to look a little better for Zane. And this COTA finish, I think it was more of a lucked into situation, right place, right time. But for what we're about to talk about here, the 3-car pileup, very much AI driving into each other. It almost looked like, but that's the only way I could describe it. It looked like an AI mess. But yeah, Zane Smith, he's going to be good. He's in good shape with all these top finishes. He's not really had a bad week yet to speak of, and it looks like he can keep his way up there. He can manage himself with the road courses, and that's going to be pretty critical. Moving on with seeing that, trucks are going to Mid-Ohio this year and making their return to Watkins Glen, I believe. So it's going to be
Sonoma, I think.
Oh, Sonoma.
Trucks,
they switch it up, or were we going to go to Watkins Glen with trucks?
I think they went last year, but
they switched it around. Okay.
But,
all right. Well, Mid-Ohio and Sonoma look good for Smith so far.
Yeah, it's crazy to think, it wasn't that long ago that we didn't have any road courses on the Truck Series schedule. Now we have 3. So, I think fans have been asking for more road courses, and NASCAR is giving it to them. I don't know if 3 might be a little excessive for the Truck Series. Maybe 6 is excessive in Cup or whatever it is now. I think it was 7 last year, actually, right, with the Daytona road course. So, it's all about finding that happy medium, but it does give the road course drivers an opportunity to showcase their skills. And like you mentioned, Smith was really in the right place at the right time this weekend. Kind of crazy to see 4 wide on a road course on the final lap, but that's exactly what happened because Alex Bowman and Stuart Friesen were side by side and they clashed with one another on the final lap, went straight, and that ended up taking out Kyle Busch in the process. Now, Busch didn't end up too bad off. He recovered to finish 3rd, but Friesen fell back to 9th, and Bowman dropped all the way back to 25th. So, Brandon, what did you think of Bowman and Friesen's fight on the last lap? And do you feel bad for Kyle Busch getting swept up in it? I mean, he only gets these truck races 5 times a year now, and, it's not like he has 60 wins to fall back on. Do you feel bad that Busch got screwed out of a win here, really through no fault of his own?
Yeah, I do. I actually do. I have some sympathy for Rowdy this time. That was his race to win, and he was kind of taken by the hack. No, I'm just kidding. Alex Bowman's not a hack. He knows how to find his way. See, we used to call that the closer. That was Kevin Harvick. He was the closer a few years ago, for all you new fans out there. But we used to call hacks closers. I guess when you don't like them, they're called hacks. But I think Alex Bowman's got a great following, and it was good to see him in the 7 truck for Spire with that Hendrick backing, and then seeing that old Ricky Hendrick scheme on the truck. But I don't feel bad. I mean, I feel bad for Kyle Busch this time, not getting that win there at COTA. And Stuart Friesen really impressed me there, keeping his way up there. We think of him as the guy that's going to do well at Eldora or Knoxville, or are they at Knoxville? Again, schedule woes for yours truly. Are they at Knoxville this year, or are they going to a different dirt track?
Bristol Dirt, I think.
Bristol Dirt and Knoxville.
Yeah.
Okay.
Tony Stewart wasn't super happy about Eldora falling off the schedule, but
no.
Yeah, I think that's probably the best dirt track for the trucks. I'd take that over the artificial dirt track at Bristol, and the race at Knoxville last year I think wasn't very good. With all
it's made for sprint cars.
Yeah,
that's why.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, well, that Kyle Busch just barely misses out on that top 2 streak, which he got very lucky at Vegas. With Zane Smith's disqualification here, but it is crazy. Every time he hops into one of these trucks, he's always up there at front fighting for the win, and
he's good.
He is good. As much as I feel like it's almost doing a disservice to the series regulars, because he does have some solid competition, but despite that, and despite how good his competition can be, he always finds his way up fighting for the win. So it's crazy to see. He very easily could have had another win this weekend. Joe chiming in here for trucks. I feel like 3 is a good number. Any more would probably be too much. And I'd have to agree probably with, you do have to remember that the trucks have a much shorter schedule than Cup or even Xfinity do. So, trying to find the same ratio of road course races to non-road course races as you have in Cup. I think 3 is a fine number for trucks. Anywhere from 2 to 4, I think would probably be okay. Any more than that, you're really starting to skew the schedule the wrong way there. Now, one driver that I want to put a bit of spotlight on is a driver that our own Kobe Lambeth made his one shining moment on yesterday's show, and that is Brad Perez. Now, Perez on most race weekends is actually a tire specialist for Matt DiBenedetto's truck team. He's also done work for Tommy Joe Martin's Alpha Prime Racing in the Xfinity Series. But Perez is also a driver himself. He's best known for competing in Spec Miatas and Legend cars. He made his ARCA debut with Josh Williams' team at Watkins Glen last year. And this weekend, Perez got the opportunity to race for Reaume Brothers Racing in their number 43 truck. Perez met Kimberly Kervin at the BMW Performance Center in South Carolina not so long ago. It's where he's a driving instructor. And Kervin's sponsorship played no small role in allowing Perez to race on Saturday. His story is very encouraging to anyone who wants to be a part of sport, and Perez is proof that establishing valuable relationships and connections can still provide hardworking people with opportunities to showcase their talents. So before we move on, Brandon, do you have anything you want to add on Brad Perez's strong run in his Truck Series debut? He got a top 20 in a truck that, the equipment is kind of limited compared to the top teams.
Yeah, man, that's a feel-good story. And I didn't know, I didn't really realize this story happened unless you would have brought it up and Kobe bring it up for his shining moment the other day. Yeah, that's really cool for Brad Perez. And I really like that we can still see guys or girls or anyone who's got 2 hands to drive. You don't even need, we've got, for Robert Wickens, we've got the braking on the, you don't need all your body parts to function to drive. It's all racers everywhere. And it's really great to see this kind of story. Like, even if we're seeing a lot of newer drivers come in with the sim racing side of things. And it's good to see a good grassroots, like back to the basics. Like you worked hard in BMW, you worked hard with Miatas, and you're a part of the crew for another truck. And then here you come able to show what you've got and make a top 20 debut. That's that kind of thing hasn't really been seen in a while, I don't think. And so it's really cool for Brad. I hope he gets a lot more opportunities to do something like this.
Yeah, totally agree. I do just want to address real quickly. SHT says there's a bot in the chat. Block him. I'm on that. So I just want to make sure that doesn't go unaddressed here. But yes, Brad Perez, definitely a story worth talking about. And I hope that he gets the opportunity to continue to showcase his talent. He does still have a day job with number 25 truck team. So, I'm sure they missed him this weekend, but it's great to see him get these opportunities. I hope he gets them in the future as well.
Yeah. If he keeps showing out, he could be driving that 25 truck.
Yeah. Who knows? Yeah.
Matt better step it up.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure Matt's trying to work his way back to Xfinity or Cup. We'll see if he gets an opportunity there as well. But who knows what the future holds for Brad Perez. It is a great story. Now, moving on now to the Xfinity Series, AJ Allmendinger may have missed out on the weekend sweep yesterday, but he did pick up the Xfinity Series win, and that is something that our own Brandon Crosslin predicted. So Congratulations, Brandon. I know we don't do an official pick a winner for the series we cover here, but I know you called that multiple times, I think. So
yeah, multiple weeks in a row. We were looking towards COTA. I said AJ's going to get it at COTA, and I was actually surprised. I was not watching the full race, and then saw that the finishing results from Kobe Lambeth. I was like, no way. So it's a good end to the weekend to see AJ finally get that win. He's going to be hopefully locked into the chase. The championship.
Yeah. Playoffs, even though you don't play stock car racing, you race.
You race, yeah.
Yeah, but
chase would be a better term.
Yeah. That's we could spend another half hour on that.
Opened a can of worms for Ben Schneider.
Yeah, we are. We got to be careful here. But getting back to Allmendinger, his 11th Xfinity Series win, 7th on road courses, and actually, when you take into account his 2 Cup Series wins, it was his 9th road course victory across all of NASCAR's top 3 divisions, which ties him with Jeff Gordon for most all-time. Anytime you tie Jeff Gordon in any sort of NASCAR category, I'd say you're doing a pretty good job. So with this in mind, let's talk about AJ Allmendinger for a little bit. Does he have a case as one of the best road course drivers in the history of our sport? It's kind of crazy to think about, the struggles at the start of his career, but this renaissance that he's had with colleague, is he up there with the Jeff Gordons and Tony Stewarts of the road course NASCAR world?
When it comes to road course things, I think you could really fight for that case. I'd say AJ Allmendinger, we can look at him in the same way we see Boris Said, Ron Fellows. And I just thought of this earlier. When we put Jeff Gordon on the road course, we might call him Jeff Gordon. And also you think of Tony Stewart as a phenomenal road course racer. Although, see, the road course ability of drivers now has expanded. So I think it's a little tougher now to be a road course driver or to be one of the best road course racers in NASCAR because, you look at Jeff Gordon's career, most of the time, all he had to deal with was Watkins Glen and Sonoma. And now drivers are faced with the difficult task of not only those two difficult circuits, but you also have the Charlotte Roval. And now, goodness, we've thrown in Road America and all these other great American road courses. And now Circuit of the Americas and going to have Portland for Xfinity. AJ Allmendinger is going to have fun there too. But yeah, I think we can put him up there with the top road course racers of all time after his recent success. And I don't think it's over. I think it's far from over. I think he's going to we're going to look back at his career as one of the road course guys.
Yeah, well, that's a great point that you bring up there. Because like you mentioned, I remember even when I first starting getting interested in the sport, like 2007, 2008, David Ruderman was a rookie in 2007, but Michael Waltrip Racing pulled him out of the road courses and put PJ Jones in because, he was a road course ringer and they wanted the better opportunity to qualify for the race. You had so many cars in the entry list back then. And, I think drivers didn't take the road courses as seriously because they didn't have to,
Yeah,
you only went there twice a year. It was just a weekend that you had to get through and survive. And then especially, a little bit later with a chase, points reset, there was no road course in the chase. So it wasn't as important of a skill. Whereas now you look at the schedule and if you're not a good road course racer, you really are not going to have a solid shot at a championship because there's so much of the schedule taken up by them. We have one in the playoffs now, so it's a much more important skill. We have a comment from Joe, still active in the chat room. Thanks for sticking around, Joe. Do you believe Allmendinger will sweep the road courses in the Xfinity Series? Brandon, we'll go to you first.
Well, being the AJ Allmendinger expert so far this season, I'm just joking. I don't think he can do it all year, though. I think somebody's going to find a way to get around him, possibly at Portland, being a new circuit. I know he's going to like being there. He's going to be in the top 5 if he doesn't mess up, but I think somebody else is going to have a turn there. It might be Ty Gibbs. It might be Justin Allgaier, who had a solid run. It might be another Cup guy that bushwhacks down when we go to Portland. Or, well, will they do that?
Probably not going to be at Portland because that's a standalone race.
Yeah, it is standalone.
We'll see. Yeah,
it could
be Watkins Glen or something like that.
Right.
But Joe brings up another good point here. Portland, the site of AJ's first win in Champ Car. So that is a place that he certainly has a lot of great memories from, and maybe he can make some more great memories when they go back. I probably tend to agree with you. It's probably going to be a stretch for him to sweep all the road courses in the Xfinity Series when you look at the competition that he's got. We could see somebody do like what Ross Chastain actually did this weekend. Of course, Chastain came out on top in the Cup race. Ironically, in a finish with Allmendinger there. That was a close battle for the win on the Cup side. But, we could see a situation like that again. Bubba Wallace, I think, is confirmed to be doing one more of these with Joe Gibbs Racing. I know we don't think of him as a road course racer, but he will be in good equipment. So, who knows what's going to happen. But I think it is probably going to be a stretch, even though AJ is so good on these tracks. We have a lot of them. So the more there are, the harder it is to sweep. I think, it's going to be a tall order for him to do that. But if anybody can do it, there's only one guy that can now. Now we've had the first road course. There's only one guy left who can say he's got a chance to do that. So we'll see.
I'm not sure which one's first, but I think Indianapolis might be his next road course win. I don't know if Indianapolis or Road America is first, but I'll say Indy GP might be his shot.
Yeah. Well, you talk about trying to pull off the double here, which he was first in the Xfinity race this weekend, and then up front had a shot to win Cup. It was the Xfinity race that he nearly missed out on last season, and then came back the next day to win the Cup race. So, he's done one of the two a couple times now. It would be interesting to see if he can get this weekend sweep now that he's back part-time in Cup with Colleague. So we'll just have to wait and see what happens there. Now, not unlike what happened in Formula 2, race control came under some scrutiny this weekend for how they handled some things, particularly track limits. That's one of a race fan's worst nightmares, I think, hearing those two words. But this was kind of strange to me, Brandon. I have to admit, they were only enforced on part of the circuit. And, they ended up making a controversial call on Jeb Burton and Jeremy Clements, which cost them at minimum a top 10, maybe even a little bit better than that. And, you could argue a lot of drivers cut the course in the same ways that they did, but they didn't get penalized for it. So do you think NASCAR needs a more strict track limits policy, or should they just allow drivers to use any part of a track where the surface is drivable?
I think this might be a great way for NASCAR to differentiate themselves from the open wheel series that surround them, and particularly Formula One, which is, Circuit of the Americas was made for F1 as far as the layout and everything, in my opinion. But I think this would be a great way for NASCAR to make themselves different, and it would make it more of a drivers have at it sort of atmosphere if you're able to go over the track limits every now and then and make a better racing product. Now, to the purists, they're not going to like that, but I think it might be something to consider. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, well, I think, you've seen it at Watkins Glen and, Sonoma as well. Ever since they took the gravel traps away, we've seen cars, run wide and way off the racetracks, that they're not scrubbing off as much speed, even though it's a much longer way around. I tend to believe, I'm not a fan of the yellow line rule when we go to Daytona, Talladega. I feel like if you don't want drivers using that part of the racetrack, you've got to put a natural barrier there, whether it's, curbing or probably not curbing, actually, because that's caused some problems as we've seen it like the Daytona road course. But, something like grass or a temporary barrier or something that makes sure that you're not going to cut that part of the course. When it's paved, I think drivers are going to use it as long as it's legal. But, I really don't understand what they did this weekend where, it's only one part of the S's that we're going to enforce that. But, coming around the last final corners, you can run as wide as you want and, even use that to your advantage. I feel like it's kind of got to be an all or nothing thing here. And, unfortunately this weekend, it was kind of tough to reconcile that. I guess that's a good word, to think of, what are we doing here? It seemed strange that we're going to do it for part of a track, but not the other part.
I also want to add too, like another thing to consider would be how heavy stock cars are, and to add such strict track limits to stock cars. They need a lot, like at Watkins Glen, removing the sand traps. They need a lot of room to comfortably exit a corner, and that's not something that open wheel car has to face. And I think it's kind of like putting a beast. We like that in some respects, but, putting a big beast on a little. That's why short track racing is fun. You put a big horsepower car on a little track, but I think for road courses, it might take away some of the enjoyment if we could just get technicalities left and right from cutting the course. And I'm not talking like huge time gains cutting the course, but like little technicalities. I think that's not going to help your overall racing product, and it's not going to make the drivers happy. I know that.
Yeah, well, of course, you're not going to go straight through the S's, obviously. It would be absurd if we let drivers cut the course like that. But, running wide, at turns, whatever it is, 19 or 20 coming to the finish, that's something that I think, again, it's inevitable if you don't have a rule there, or if you, have asphalt there or pavement or a drivable surface over it. And then that's always the debate we come back to in Formula One and, series that have track limits enforced. If it's a gray area, it can sometimes be a judgment call if somebody's right on the line, or did they gain an advantage? Did they not gain an advantage? If they gave an advantage, did they give it right back? And therefore the penalty kind of serves itself. So, a lot of times it does only cause more questions than it does answers. So it is something for NASCAR to consider going forward. I just want some consistency. That's the thing that I'm looking for here.
Yeah, and I don't think you want NASCAR in the hands of that sort of technical ruling, because I don't think they would be consistent. I think they've shown I mean, respectfully, and in previous years, they've shown with the double yellow line rule and other things like that they can't be consistent. So I don't think you want them to have that much power when it comes to track limits. And I think also I just go back to I think it's cooler to see the car be able to just where physics naturally lead it to go. Let them be able to have that much runoff area without any penalty.
Yeah, well, you just saw it at Atlanta last week. The rule came back a couple times, and it's something again that I think some people say it's a necessary evil, but we see big wrecks at Daytona, Talladega, and now I guess we have to throw Atlanta in there as well all the time
because
anyway.
you constrict them.
Yeah. So it's one of those things that if we tried to bring like that kind of a rule to the road courses as well, I fear that we'd only have more controversy there. Now, one final question, I guess, it's kind of a similar question in terms of, what we do with the tracks here. The laps at COTA are quite long by NASCAR standards. And Brandon, like you mentioned, it is a purpose-built Formula One racetrack. So it makes sense that the track is as long as it is. But when you bring the NASCAR stock cars, they're obviously much bigger, much slower cars. It's, it makes for some really long lap times and a really long caution lap in particular. So, we're 2 years into this run here. Do you like seeing NASCAR use the full circuit, or would you rather them use a shorter layout like we used at Watkins Glen? We don't run the boot. Sonoma's taken the carousel away again this year after that experiment hasn't gone so great in the opinion of some people. Do you think it might be worth looking at an alternate layout at COTA to minimize the length of the caution laps in particular?
Yeah, seeing NASCAR on the entire Grand Prix circuit of COTA kind of reminds me of looking at like British touring cars on Brands Hatch, like the full circuit. Like it's a very long. They're slow and they're slower in the grand scheme of how big these tracks are. So yeah, I'm not too familiar with the smaller layouts of COTA. I know they exist. I mean, obviously, as we're talking about it, but I'm sure they took that into consideration before they made the plans last year to go to Circuit of the Americas. So maybe I would have to see it play out first before I would consider that. But I think NASCAR made the right decision going with the full layout. They wanted to utilize all the turns that people are familiar with. But yeah, caution laps are a problem. So it might be something to do.
Well, here's a good point that thank you, Joe, for bringing this up. I kind of want to talk about this. I'm surprised I didn't think of it when putting the script together tonight. He says, in my opinion, NASCAR should use a virtual safety car for COTA. Take too long. The cautions take too long here. But, another thing that came up, local yellows. That's something that exists in other series. When you have a lap as long as you have at COTA, it's very frustrating, particularly late in the race when you have one car at the back stall on track and come to a complete stop and lose power when, the track is as long as it is, and that necessitates a full course caution. When, in a lot of ways, if you had a local yellow system, and this goes for all road courses, obviously, COTA's a long track. So, you think of it being a problem there. Road America being more than 4 miles long, I think is another situation you might run into a problem there. But do we need a local yellow system? Would that be too much to try to police for NASCAR, do you think?
Well, first of all, with a virtual safety car, it would be called a virtual pace car here in America. But no, I don't think it'd be too much for NASCAR to handle. But I would just be worried there's plenty of runoff room at COTA for them to be able to attend to drivers while they're still green flag on the track. But yeah, it might be messy. I don't know. There might be a reason why we stick with full course cautions.
Yeah, well, the frustration came back this weekend several times. One car. One car that's not even damaged, and we're going to waste however many minutes it is under caution. It does get kind of frustrating, especially towards the end of the race. When we get into an overtime finish or whatever the case may be. So it's something. Again, I think we have a problem, and NASCAR should try to address it. Whether or not local yellows or a VSC, if you will, is the answer, I'm not sure, but I do think it is something that they should look into. All right. Well, we're coming up on almost 50 minutes here. Brandon, you weren't on any of our programs earlier this weekend. So again, I'll throw it out to you with everything you saw even the Cup Series and F1, if you want to take that into consideration. What is your one shining moment on this motorsports weekend here?
Man, I was just happy to have a Cup race at Circuit of the Americas in the sunshine. That will take the cake for me. That's all I really wanted. I was thinking when they go to COTA, I hope it's not pouring down rain in Austin. And we got that for the whole weekend. And I think that's a big win for NASCAR to finally show the kind of race at COTA that they had in promotions last year when they had the quote unquote best season ever. It was great to finally see that come into fruition. And it's nice to see the Gen 7 car on a road course officially for the first time. Another big win. And also it was nice to see Bubba Wallace back in the Xfinity Series. I'm a huge fan of Xfinity Series and Dr. Pepper. I like Dr. Pepper schemes in the old Busch Series. And I really wish Bubba would do double at Darlington and we could get a Dr. Pepper throwback.
Yeah, that would be nice. And, on the subject, actually, Ross Chastain checked that box this weekend, another driver to win in all three national touring divisions. Bubba Wallace has a Cup win, obviously, at Talladega, and several Truck Series wins throughout his career. He is missing the Xfinity win, though. So although I must admit I'm not a huge fan of bushwhackers, if you will, drivers that go down to the lower divisions, it is always cool to see somebody add their name to that list. We saw it with Martin Truex Jr. getting a truck win at Bristol Dirt last year. So maybe Bubba Wallace can find some more races with Gibbs and pick that up. That might be a nice story for him. And maybe another Dr. Pepper race win diecast comes out of that. Who knows? But my one shining moment, we talked about him earlier in the show. I'm going to take Kobe's from, yesterday. I wanted to shout out Ross Chastain while I had a chance on yesterday's show, but got to give a shout out to Brad Perez. Great to see him out there, and great to see him interviewed by Fox Sports as well. Let me give some credit where it's due. I know I've been kind of critical of Fox here these last couple of weeks to start the season, but even Brad was asking, I don't know why you're talking to me right now. I'm running at the back of the pack, but it is a great story and it's worth mentioning. So all credit to Michael Waltrip for doing that interview on the air, and to Fox Sports for showing a little bit of love to the smaller teams here. You love to see it, and I hope that that's something that they continue doing throughout the rest of this season. You
get an A+ this weekend, Fox. Good job.
Yeah. Well, I don't know about an A+. You get an A+
B-
for that moment, but does the rest of the coverage average? There were still some issues with the zooming, I think. I give them a B. It was a good weekend. It was an A by the standards they've set, all season. But
I think your Fox bingo card out.
Yeah. I think there are some things still that they could improve. But again, don't want to be too hard on them. I know there's great people there who are doing their best to give us great coverage. And I think the coverage of COTA was certainly a step up. So I'll credit where it's due. Hope to see more of that this year. And we hope to see more of you tuning into Grid Live Encore in the future. That's going to do it for another episode here. And as always, we want to encourage you, if you haven't already, take a moment to subscribe to the Grid Network here on YouTube and follow us on all of our social media handles. You can see right there, TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. We've got them all here at Grid Network. And if you really like what we're doing, take 5 minutes after the show here, maybe consider investing in our Patreon and join Colin, Mark, and Deshelle, who we're so thankful for, continuing to invest in what we do here and keeping us on the air throughout 2022. If you'd rather make a one-time donation, you can buy me a coffee. And of course, a special thanks to our friend Ed Hunter from Formula E Zone and a couple of our regulars, Amber and Zachary, for doing just that. You can buy a coffee for your favorite on-air talent, whether it's me, Brandon, anybody else here at Grid Network. We would greatly appreciate it. Visit our sponsor, public.com, the stock market social media home. We have the referral code GRIDnet you see on screen. It's in the description box below as well. It'll give you $5 to invest, and public.com allows you to connect with your friends, make new friends, and use tools to learn how to invest in the stock market. Now, Wednesday, we have Grid Tonight, as always, with Adam and Kobe. Thursday, Joe and Daniel host Women in Motorsports. And again, hopefully I'll be joining them for that as well. We'll see. We got to make sure the schedule's aligned for that, but hopefully that's coming as well. And of course, Grid Live pre-race on Saturday, wrap up on Sunday, and then Brandon and I will be right back here on Monday. It's probably going to be a bit of a shorter show next week because all we have is Xfinity at Richmond, but they are joined by the Wheel and Modified Tour, who I know we haven't discussed so far this season, but maybe we'll cover that just so that we have a little bit more to talk about. So Brandon, thanks again for joining us. I'm Ben Schneider. Thank you all for watching. And as always, have a wonderful week, everybody.
Don't be an anonymous investor. Join the stock market social media platform public.com. Invest any amount of money and share with friends and new friends. Discover new opportunities, such as new companies and potential business partners, and useful tools for beginners, and share your experience with friends on public.com. Link in the video description gets you $5 for being a Grid Network viewer. Use the referral code GRIDnet for your free $5 to invest. Start investing and networking on public.com.